Part 10. Victim Testimony. Whitney. Whitney grew up in a vulnerable household. Her mother suffered from severe mental health issues, and her father was absent from her life. She was first groomed and sexually abused at the age of 15 by two adult Pakistani brothers. One of the brothers, Whitney recalls, acted as a boyfriend figure. Both brothers would regularly take her to a flat in Birmingham, supply her with alcohol, and in her words, she would have sex with them. Their interactions with Whitney soon turned violent. They began beating her, and, on one occasion, held a hot iron to her face. Whitney recalls that the brothers stopped contacting her after they arrived at her house to collect her and found all of her uncles sitting on the wall outside. After that incident, they never came back. She cannot remember exactly how or why her uncles were there, but she believes her mother had asked them to intervene. Many years later, Whitney's daughter began self-harming at age 11 and even attempted suicide. Her phone contained sexually explicit messages. Whitney's daughter told her there was a sex room at school run by the older boys. Deeply concerned for her daughter, Whitney contacted social services. They offered little support beyond talking through the problems. In one instance, social services accidentally sent her 6 other children's case files instead of her daughter's, which left her deeply distrustful of their ability to help. Whitney's daughter was coerced into sending a sexual image, which was then circulated across multiple schools, the local community, and eventually the internet. This led to her receiving unwanted attention from adult men of various ethnicities and from multiple countries. From that point on, Whitney's daughter began going missing regularly. These disappearances were directly linked to sexual demands and exploitation by older boys and adult men. She was threatened with violence if she contacted the police and sometimes returned home with items of clothing missing. Whitney repeatedly reported her concerns to the police and social services, clearly stating that she believed her daughter was being sexually exploited. Police responses were often delayed, statements were not taken, and investigations were closed without further action. Social services refused to relocate the family, downgraded the risk level, and eventually closed the case despite ongoing exploitation. Whitney herself was blamed, and her own past was used to undermine her credibility as a parent. Her family received repeated threats, including warnings that their house would be burned down, faces would be slashed, and machetes would be used. Later, Whitney discovered that her daughter had been placed on the National Referral Mechanism, NRM, as a trafficking victim, without her being informed. The NRM is the UK's official framework for identifying, referring, and supporting victims of human trafficking and modern slavery, and serves as a recognition by a designated professional that an individual is a potential victim of human trafficking or modern slavery. Part 11. Victim Testimony. Sally. Sally is the mother of a daughter who was found guilty of 9 counts of perverting the course of justice for lying about being groomed by an Asian grooming gang and sentenced to 8 years in prison. Despite this, Sally believes there is evidence to suggest her daughter was a genuine victim of the gangs. Sally described a previously stable, working family life until housing instability and family stress coincided with changes in her daughter's behavior. The house the family were buying fell through, but they had already moved out of their family home and all their possessions were in storage. A family friend was able to rent them a part-renovated property on a short-term basis, but it was not ideal for a family with 4 children. It was only meant to be temporary, but the family ended up staying there for 10 months. Her daughter began making up stories, such as claiming her mother and stepdad were going away and leaving her to look after her 5-year-old brother at school. This resulted in school involvement in their family life. The stresses the household was under led to arguments that brought in both the police and social services. After leaving school at 16, Sally's daughter began working at a local pub. On one occasion she was invited to a party. Sally received a call later that evening from one of her daughter's friends saying that her daughter was lying on the pavement outside the property. If Sally couldn't pick her up, they were going to take her to the bus stop and leave her there, as she was making too much noise. When her mother found her lying on the ground, she was making a horrendous wailing sound and kept saying not to touch her. Her mother recognized that something was seriously wrong and took her to hospital. Sally's daughter told the nurse carrying out the examination that she had been sexually assaulted. The hospital notes recorded that her genitalia was swollen and red. The hospital reported the incident to the police. Sally's daughter then received threats via Snapchat, became scared about the outcome of the case, and withdrew from the process. Around the same time, social services closed their case on the family. Sally believes her daughter did not want to invite more trouble into the household. It later emerged in court that they had all been smoking cannabis. Sally believes her daughter had participated and that something had happened to her, but she was found guilty of lying about being sexually abused. Sally's daughter then began working as a kitchen assistant at a care home and a glass collector at a nightclub, in addition to her pub job. After turning 18, she was able to work behind the bar at the nightclub, where her behavior began to change. She would return home with cuts and bruises. On one occasion, she came back with a black eye and said there had been a fight in the nightclub and she had been hit accidentally. She appeared more tired and distressed than usual. Sally began to notice that her daughter's phone would ring regularly, with Asian men's names appearing on the screen. When asked about them, her daughter tried to hide the calls. The bar manager stopped her daughter from working on the main floor because she was small and they struggled to keep track of her. They also ensured she was always paired with an older member of staff, as the Asian men would harass her if she was working alone. One Asian man gifted her a gold chain. Sally's daughter began saying she wanted to move away from home. She had regularly traveled to a nearby town by train. Sally would pick her up and drop her off at the station, and she never appeared to have been drinking or using drugs. One day, Sally returned home to find her daughter had left with her possessions and was ignoring her calls. She had told work colleagues that she had moved because her stepfather was harming her, but this was not true. After a few days of investigation, Sally managed to find where her daughter had moved to. When she arrived at the flat, she found her daughter with 2 police officers to whom she was reporting an allegation of sexual assault. When her daughter handed in her phone as evidence, the police found hundreds of messages from Asian men. They believed she was being groomed. She was later found guilty of lying about the sexual assault she had reported. Over the course of the following year, Sally reported her daughter missing 39 times. She would often turn up in various towns across the region, battered, bruised, intoxicated, or on drugs. She was usually without underwear and spent increasing amounts of time in hospital. One police force made a referral to the NRM, believing she was a victim of trafficking. Another police force repeatedly arrested her and seized her phone, which meant the referral agency could not contact her as her number kept changing. One incident involved Sally's daughter being locked in a room above an Indian restaurant, with the man refusing to let her leave. The police ignored it, believing she was lying. Another incident involved an Asian man following her, trying to grab her and take her away. Thankfully, she was with her sister and friends, who quickly put her in a taxi and sent her home. That same man was later arrested for breaking into a woman's house and sexually assaulting her while she slept. Nevertheless, the police still insisted Sally's daughter had been lying about the earlier incident. The police believed she had a mental health condition and was deliberately self-harming and putting herself in dangerous situations. They wanted to have her sectioned, but a doctor disagreed, noting that she still had capacity. Another incident involved a different Asian man who refused to leave Sally's daughter's flat. Police told him to leave but asked no questions. He left behind a balaclava, yet the police showed no interest despite him carrying it while visiting a young woman. After her flat door was kicked down in yet another incident while she was missing, she returned to her mother's home. Sally's daughter later explained that she had moved away to keep her family safe. She claimed she had been told that if she did not do as her abusers said, they would harm her brother, sexually assault her sister, and firebomb the house. She had lied to her colleagues about her stepdad to avoid bringing repercussions on the family. She went missing again. The police stated they believed she was making the whole thing up and injuring herself, so they charged her with perverting the course of justice. Part of her bail conditions required her not to leave Sally's house. The following week, her daughter attempted suicide by overdose. She went missing one final time and was found in a field with injuries to her head and ear, a severed finger, and numerous cuts and bruises. Following this, she wrote a post on Facebook alleging that she had been a victim of grooming gangs. The post went viral. Within half an hour, the police arrested her and she was sent to prison. Following her daughter's conviction, the family experienced sustained harassment and intimidation, particularly from one Muslim man. Sally reports repeated failures by the police to protect them. She believes her daughter was a vulnerable young woman who lied at times but was nevertheless groomed. Part 12. Victim Testimony. Marlon. Marlon is the father of a daughter who was a repeated victim of grooming, as well as being repeatedly failed by authorities. Marlon reported his 14-year-old daughter Scarlett missing a number of times because she was being groomed and exploited. The police informed social services that what Marlon was doing was appropriate, as he was acting to safeguard his daughter. However, social services did not accept the police's assessment, and instead dragged out the investigation for 3 months. During that time, his daughter disclosed concerns to her school, which resulted in social services attending Marlon's home. While his daughter was present, they told him that if he tried to stop her from leaving the house, she should call social services or the police. Social services, undermining his parental authority, resulted in her missing episodes escalating dramatically. Social services effectively gave her permission to go missing, and the case was then closed without meaningful intervention. Marlon placed a formal complaint to social services stating that he was struggling to cope with his daughter's missing episodes. The social worker assigned to him, following this, openly stated to him that they were only taking the case because of his complaint. This made him feel like the problem rather than a parent concerned with safeguarding his daughter from abuse. On one occasion, Marlon stood in front of the door to prevent his daughter from leaving late at night, resulting in her repeatedly kicking him and breaking 3 of his fingers. He reported this to social services, who simply stated he should walk away when she becomes violent. Even after showing him the bruises on his back that he received as he walked away, they did not change the advice they gave. Marlon remains convinced that if his child were male and he were female, the response would have been different. Marlon would often spend his evenings driving in search of his daughter until 3 or 4 a.m., while having work the following day, which his employer was not supportive of. He often reported her missing to the police, who would sometimes turn up to his house many hours later. On one occasion, he saw footage of the police saying not to bother even waking him. This made him feel more like a problem rather than it being the safeguarding emergency that it was. Scarlett was unlawfully excluded from school due to grooming-related behavior and assigned a new school where the grooming gang operated. A multi-agency risk management meeting was eventually convened with Children's Services and the police's missing from home team. While the meeting was ongoing, one of the police officers in attendance told Marlon to stop reporting his daughter missing. Marlon challenged this, which resulted in the police officer shouting at him in front of all in attendance. The officer has since been dismissed. The social worker and manager present did not intervene, but privately acknowledged he was right to continue to report his daughter missing. They refused to launch a formal complaint against the officer. Shortly after this, his daughter went missing for several days and was eventually found at Marlon's mother's house, unkempt, distressed, and stating that she had been sexually assaulted. Care staff returned her to the location of the sexual assault, thereby destroying forensic opportunities, and failed to report it to police until days later. Marlon had to make his own referral to the crisis center, by which time forensic evidence was lost. The perpetrator was arrested, but bailed with the condition not to contact Marlon's daughter. Immediately upon leaving the station, he called her and threatened her life. He was an adult and drug dealer, and his associates soon began attending Marlon's home. His daughter was terrified of them. An older woman began to groom and manipulate Marlon's daughter under the guise of friendship. After another missing episode, Marlon was able to trace his daughter to a specific property. Despite repeated calls and reports of men entering the property, both police and social services failed to remove her or issue an abduction warning notice. His daughter was later found to be the victim of criminal exploitation, including drug supply, prostitution, and being forced to dig up a firearm. These acts were directed by the older woman amongst others. At this point, the impact on Marlon was catastrophic. He was physically exhausted, anxious, depressed, and lived in constant fear. He was attacked by masked individuals in his home, with the police response delayed and dismissive. Marlon's daughter was eventually taken into secure care, where she was subjected to further abuse, including sexual abuse by staff and other children, neglect, and safeguarding failures. Marlon made multiple complaints. At a court hearing, social services attempted to place his daughter on a child protection plan for emotional abuse and neglect by Marlon himself. However, the judge intervened and ordered this to be amended to be recorded as beyond parental control. Marlon's daughter continued to be moved between unsuitable placements. She was groomed repeatedly, trafficked, forced into drug supply, and sexually assaulted by adult men. She became pregnant as a result of sexual assault. The handling of her termination by professionals was traumatic and negligent. Police later charged Scarlett with intent to supply Class A drugs, despite her being a victim of trafficking and on the national referral mechanism. Scarlett was placed in a unit run entirely by male Muslim staff where she was groomed again. Racist abuse and extremist comments were made to her. Marlon again raised concerns which were ignored. Despite his repeated attempts to help his daughter, he has experienced many instances of violence from her as a result of the trauma and grooming. He has experienced many assaults, received black eyes and had to sleep barricaded in his room. He repeatedly requested domestic abuse support, but was refused because he was a male parent. He has been forced to complete parenting courses and blamed for his daughter's abuse. The whole experience has harmed Marlon financially, emotionally and psychologically. He states it has destroyed his life. He is no longer the person he used to be. Marlon's case highlights that parents can also be victims of both grooming networks as well as widespread institutional failure. If you would like to hear Marlon's story in greater detail, he has recently published a book about his experiences titled In Plain Sight, 2026. Part 13. Victim Testimony. Wallace. Wallace's early childhood in Scotland was marked by poverty, instability and a lack of consistent adult protection. His mother suffered from mental health and substance misuse problems. She struggled to comprehend the situations she put her son in and often failed to intervene, which allowed Wallace's abuse to continue. Wallace's mother psychologically and emotionally abused him throughout his childhood. From a young age, adult men moved in and out of his life, and he was encouraged to refer to them as dad or uncle. This made it seem normal that adult men would be around him as a child. He was moved around many different home environments and learned to accept situations without question. His early experiences made him believe that adults could enter his personal space without consent, that fear should be tolerated, and that he had no control. Wallace's earliest memory of abuse occurred when he was 4 or 5 years old, when an adult came into his bedroom at night and got into bed with him. He could not identify who it was, but instinctively knew it was wrong. His main abusers were his mother's partner and the partner's brother, who both exercised authority over Wallace and were treated as trusted adults. They were connected to a biker group in the area. Not all members of the group were involved in the abuse, but a core group of men were. Wallace recalls being taken to a particular house where multiple men were present. It had a dark atmosphere, lit by candles, possibly snake-shaped candle holders placed near the fireplace. The setting felt deliberate and staged. Multiple adults were sitting around watching him, which instinctively made him feel unsafe. He was led into a bedroom, restrained and sexually assaulted by an adult. His mother's partner's brother spoke to him as if what had just happened was normal, despite the considerable pain and emotional distress he felt. Wallace asked if he would receive a toy for what had happened. He did receive one, but it was cheap and insignificant. Even then he realized that there was no real compensation for what had happened to him. The same pattern of abuse occurred on multiple occasions. Wallace recalls seeing other boys and girls present who were usually restrained and drugged. He also recalls being drugged himself and losing consciousness. He would often wake alone or with other abused children, disoriented and distressed. This has caused long-term psychological damage. At one point the police raided the property. They took Wallace outside and showed him adults one by one, asking if he recognized them. He had been coached to say these men were his uncles, and that is what he said. He associated authority figures with fear and wanted to avoid saying what he believed might be the wrong thing. As a result, the police intervention did not protect him. No safeguarding followed and he returned to the abusive environment. The signs of abuse were there, and only reinforced Wallace's view that speaking out would not lead to safety. As an adult, he eventually attempted to report what had happened to him, a disclosure which took years. He expected to be treated as a victim of serious childhood sexual abuse, but instead his disclosure was treated as a mental health issue. He was asked to provide psychiatric and medical notes before any proper investigation would take place. The lack of seriousness from the authorities resulted in Wallace's statements being recorded improperly. Due to this experience, he made complaints to the police, to professional bodies including the General Medical Council, and to other oversight organizations. Each process was slow, fragmented and obstructive and continued for years without resolution. During this time he was forced to relive his experiences repeatedly while being met with skepticism. At no point was his well-being considered, which further compounded his trauma as he once again felt dismissed, disbelieved and unprotected. Owing to Wallace's abuse, he has experienced long-term psychological harm. This harm has affected his education, relationships, sense of self-worth and his ability to feel safe. He wishes for his abusers and the authorities who failed to act to be held to account, and for his story to help protect other children from similar harm. Part 14. Victim Testimony. Sebastian. Sebastian was raised in Scotland in a stable household. Sebastian's mother held down a professional job, owned her own home and car, and the family regularly went on holidays together. Despite this relatively secure background, which was not typical of abuse victims, Sebastian was raped and abused from the age of 6 by family members, without Sebastian's mother's knowledge. These family members instilled in Sebastian the belief that, to be safe, you had to give them what they wanted. This led Sebastian to develop a transactional view of interpersonal relationships. At age 11, Sebastian was introduced by these abusive family members to a local cafe owner. The owner gave Sebastian free food, lifts in his car, and free cinema tickets to build trust and a sense of obligation. From there, they began prostituting Sebastian out to a number of people. These included seemingly respectable professionals such as estate agents, solicitors, care support workers for children, and even police officers. Even at boarding school, Sebastian was raped, assaulted, and groomed by staff and connected adults, with Sebastian's injuries often ignored by medical professionals. All of Sebastian's abusers were white British. In adulthood and during the final years of the abuse, Sebastian became aware of the wider operation of the grooming networks, both in a quiet rural area and in the city. At the age of 40, Sebastian was finally able to escape a cycle of abuse that had lasted for nearly 4 decades. Following years of abuse, Sebastian, born a biological female, transitioned to the opposite sex and now identifies as a trans man. Sebastian transitioned socially at 41 and medically at 48. However, when describing the abuse experienced as a child, it remains important for Sebastian to recognize that these events occurred while living as a girl and perceived as such. Sebastian acknowledges that this transition was, at least in part, a consequence of the abuse experienced, and feels safer from further abuse when presenting as a man. Sebastian recognizes the profound impact trauma can have on a person's life and believes that different people find different ways to cope. For some, that may mean choosing a particular career or relationship, or making unhealthy choices by using substances or alcohol. For Sebastian, transition and finding peace in being Seb became the pathway to recovery. Sebastian describes healing from trauma as a form of transformation. For Sebastian, that transformation has involved a change of personal identity and finding a sense of safety never known while living as a female. Sebastian understands that others may not fully understand the paths people take to cope with trauma, but hopes that at the very least, they will try to understand. Sebastian now advocates for other survivors, with the aim of protecting vulnerable people and helping to develop local measures to prevent child abuse. Part 15. Victim Testimony. Anna. Anna was raised in a stable middle-class household with both parents present. She first experienced abuse at the age of 13 by a perpetrator who was almost 18, whom she met through friends. He began their interactions with what is known as love bombing. He complimented her, messaged her regularly, offered to buy her gifts and alcohol, requested photographs of her, and discussed meeting up. They arranged to meet at a local bus stop and go into town. At the last minute, he changed the plan and asked Anna to meet him at the end of a path in a nearby woodland. Upon arrival, his demeanor was cold and aggressive. He demanded that Anna perform oral sex on him and threatened to tell people she knew that she had sent him explicit photographs and that they had already had sex. Feeling threatened and fearful, she complied. Unbeknownst to Anna, he had covertly recorded the incident. A few days later, multiple men added her on Snapchat and began mocking and taunting her. The perpetrator himself sent Anna the video, laughed, and told her he had shared it with his boys and brothers, leaving her feeling humiliated, fearful, and traumatized. Anna reported the assault to the police, but despite explaining the coercion and threats, the case was closed with no investigation into the creation or distribution of child sexual abuse material. Rumors spread rapidly among Anna's peers, and she was mocked and insulted in public. A year later, Anna encountered 3 Muslim brothers through a friend who was already being groomed and abused by them. They supplied her with alcohol and cigarettes in a public park and waited until she was heavily intoxicated before they began assaulting her. One of the brothers pulled her behind a tree and groped her chest despite her repeated refusals. When she tried to flee, He pushed her violently against the tree, causing her to hit her head and suffer a concussion. The grooming continued through threats to her family, intimidation, verbal abuse, and cycles of affection, gifts, and coercion. Anna did not feel safe reporting the abuse to the police. On another occasion, she was again supplied with alcohol. One of the brothers grabbed her body violently, dug his fingernails into her, and yanked at her underwear repeatedly while laughing. Anna cried silently, feeling powerless to stop the assault. Afterwards, she tried to cut contact, but one of the brothers located her and banged on the door shouting while she hid inside until he left. Out of fear, she complied with further demands to meet the brothers, resulting in more assaults. There was a period of nearly 4 years before any trial was held, largely due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The perpetrators used this time to spread rumors, portraying the abuse as consensual and to boast about the assaults. In the courtroom, the abuse and intimidation continued. They pulled faces, pointed and laughed at her, and made rude remarks about her appearance. This behavior was not addressed by the court. One of the brothers was convicted of sexual assault and, as he was taken into custody, shouted, "Allahu Akbar." At the sentencing, the brother's sister shouted abuse at Anna, threatened her, and later breached her anonymity online. She blamed the jury, stating they were all white. She was eventually arrested and charged with malicious communications. Anna states there is a broader failure to confront the role of ethnicity, religion, and cultural dynamics in organized sexual exploitation due to fear of accusations of racism. Part 16. Victim Testimony. Taylor. Taylor was introduced at the age of 12 to older men through her friends, many of whom were adult Muslim men. They began by giving her lifts home from school, sometimes in black cabs and sometimes in their own cars. Taylor saw the men buying gifts for her friends and initially wished she could receive gifts too. On one occasion, instead of being taken to school, she was driven to one of the men's sisters' houses and taught how to cook Asian food. Her friends spent more time with the men, but because her parents expected her to come straight home after school, she had limited contact with them beyond the lifts. She notes that her friends were already doing adult things such as smoking, drinking, and going to clubs, whereas she still had a more childlike disposition. This dynamic continued for 3 years until she turned 15, when the abuse began. She started going with her friends to a restaurant run by Muslim men to help with deliveries. This escalated when one of the men who worked there, a 35-year-old Bangladeshi man, kissed her, causing her to run away. The same man later sexually assaulted her when she was 15. Because her friends were also being abused, Taylor believed it was normal and that the man was her boyfriend. However, when she walked in on him with one of her friends, she realized this was not the case. After this, her behavior changed dramatically. She began skipping school and drinking heavily. During a family incident that led to police being called, Taylor's father mentioned his suspicions that she was being abused by Asian men. The police responded that there was nothing they could do because she had consented. Police were called on multiple occasions regarding the abuse of Taylor and her friends, but they consistently refused to take action. The only time they helped her was when a group of Asian girls called the police. Officers then returned Taylor and her friend home. Taylor believes they only intervened on that occasion because they did not want to face accusations of racism, given that the call came from Asian women. By the age of 16, she had been introduced to many more men and was constantly harassed by them over the phone. Some men would initially appear kind and caring, leading her to believe they were in a relationship, only to lure her into situations where she would be gang raped. They used a combination of false kindness, violent abuse, and alcohol to coerce and control her. Cars would stop in the street and demand she get in. She would be sexually assaulted and then taken to the next abuser. She claims that on some nights she was passed to as many as 10 different men, and estimates she was abused by around 100 men in total. One common tactic used by the gangs was to send taxis to pick up drunk girls late at night. The driver would pretend to stop at a shop for a drink, then drive off, leaving the girl behind. A group of men would then rescue her, only to take her to a pre-arranged house for gang rape. A number of women also played a role in directing girls to their abusers in exchange for gifts and money. These women would trap the girls in properties or use violence to coerce them. Taylor has witnessed shootings, had knives held to her throat, and a gun held to her head. The gangs used the death of one of the other girls as leverage, threatening that anyone who spoke out would be next. Realizing she had to escape the abuse, Taylor made a detailed 20-page statement to the police. She provided the phone numbers of more than 100 Asian men and showed them messages in which the men threatened to sexually assault her mother, beat her father, and burn down the family home. No investigation followed. Both her teachers at school and her GP were aware that something was seriously wrong, but did not pursue their suspicions further.